And here we finally arrived at the branding. This is a pivotal episode where Mike actually brands Rob's face with the brand of Cthulhu, an important moment for both Rob and Mike as characters. Some people have asked about the topless hula girl in the background you can see behind Mike with the ukulele. That was something that was in the Airbnb house that we rented, and we just kept it. So there was a lot of really neat, unique kind of items around the house, antiques and so forth. That stand-up was one of them. We think it kind of worked. Maybe in a different world, we would have been able to have a completely, maybe straight-looking, regular suburban house. But this one has a lot of unique character to it. And especially when it comes to something like this dancing girl, we hypothesized that maybe this was some kind of compromise that Mom was having to make with Dad. Maybe this was something that Dad had that has some type of special significance to him. Maybe some type of nostalgia associated with it. And so Mom has to kind of tolerate it in the living room. This episode also lets you see some of the friendship between Rob and Ben. In a lot of the scenes, of course, we have this master and disciple relationship between the two, which, yes, can actually borderline or be abusive, I suppose. But in this one, I like to see them bonding as friends as well here, and it's great to see them bonding over something geeky like Batman. In the script, it's Mike who suggests to Acantha, hey, is there anything else in this book there, which leads them to the idea of the branding. But when we were on set, we realized, and I think it was actually Rachel Marshall who was playing Shay who realized this, that Shay didn't actually have a whole lot of things to do in the scene. And that's something that I thought a lot more about in season 2. Not only do we have to have all the characters because of the expense and the complexity, the more actors you have on the scene, but also, okay, if they're there, are they making a meaningful contribution to the scene? And we realized in this instance that Shay wasn't saying all that much sitting there. So Rachel asked Brianna, the director, if she could have that line suggesting to Acantha to reopen the Encyclopedia Magica. And that was a great idea. I mean, it makes sense for Mike to do it because Mike is the one who's leading all of this. You know, Mike is driving the action. But also, the other characters need to be agentive on screen as well, and it makes complete sense for Shay to make that suggestion because she is the dark ideal. That fits her character. She's driving something, hey, you know what I would do? I would look in the Encyclopedia Magica. So Shay drives that, and I think that was a great choice. We have this idea that we're going to need to have our flesh branded, and of course, Rob, being the guy who's all in, just absolutely embraces this. I love the response of Ben and all of this, that he's so procedural, that like, if somebody brings something up, this is a brainstorming session. It needs to be written down on the pad of paper, but then when something comes up like, oh my God, we're going to brand ourselves, all of a sudden he's like, no, wait a minute, don't write that down. Don't write that down. The procedural person, except for when it applies to him. So when we actually went to shoot the branding scene, this is shot in the backyard of my house. Actually, it's the same place, my backyard, where the night scene in episode 2 was shot, where Mike and Rob are trying to raise the dead. But we shot this during the day, obviously, and this was one of the scenes that was controversial around the neighborhood, because obviously being during the day, everyone could watch what we were doing with these people in the robes and the witches' hats and all of that. This was the scene that caused my neighbors to come over to my house after this and wonder what I was doing and was I doing something satanic. I mean, I live in rural Alabama, and this is always a problem if you're like a creative person like this in Alabama in general, especially rural Alabama. People, especially more conservative people, will definitely question what it is that you're doing. The day we shot this, it wasn't nearly as cold as it had been on different days on set, but it was definitely pretty cold here. Fortunately, my house wasn't too far away if we really needed to go inside, but also we did have the fire going for the brand in this scene, and that became a functional fire for everybody to huddle around while we were shooting in between takes. This is one of my favorite scenes because it juxtaposes the absurdity of everything the cultists do with something that really has tremendous real-life consequences, which is the facial branding that Rob undergoes. Up until this point, we've seen the cultists with their antics, and they have the dark ideal in their head about what they are supposed to be doing, but, you know, they're completely inconsequential. Part of the comedy is that they're not effective at anything. This scene could have gone that way, but this is the one that flips it on its head, that all of a sudden we have something that is drastically consequential happening. We've got the quote from the Encyclopedia Magica, which is, you know, a very dark horror interpretation of the ceremony surrounding the branding of Cthulhu, which is interpreted completely absurdly and comedically, I think, to great effect in this scene. So it seems to be going in that way. We've got that dark ideal embodied by that passage in the book. We're contrasting that visually with their absurdist interpretation of that, and then you're expecting, well, now wait a minute, is this actually going to happen? Surely something ridiculous is going to intervene so that we don't have, facial disfigurement here. But then they just go all in, get wrapped up in the moment. And of course, at the end of this episode, like, okay, is it happening? Is it happening? We cut away, and then we get this fantastic scream from Rob, to be seen, of course, in the opening of the next episode.